In today's world, most of our applications runs on cloud. Doesn't matter if it's a true SaaS application or if it's some kind of hybrid application where some components are running on-prem and some components are running on cloud. We always have a need of moving data from on-premises to our cloud environments. In this video, we're going to talk about how can we do that using SSIS or SQL Server Integration Services. My name is Fahad Ahmed. I am a technical architect with Microsoft Business Applications. I am working with Microsoft ERP, Dynamics AX, and more recently, finance and operations. I have almost 14 years of experience working with the enterprise applications. These are some ways to contact me. Other than that, I also do write blogs on dynamicsonline.org. So a quick high level, what we're going to cover in this video. So suppose you have data on-prem, means running, you have some SQL Server running on premises, or you have some data in flat files, kind of CSV or text files, and you want to move that data to your Azure SQL, which is hosted on cloud. We'll see how could we do that using SSIS. We'll create a package, we'll create a project, and then run that project to see how the data is moved. Before we get into the weeds, let's talk about what is SSIS. A quick introduction. This is not I'm not going to be I will not be going into the details of it, but I will definitely give you enough knowledge which will be helpful for you to making decisions and kind of explore this tool. So SQL Server is our SQL Server Integration Services, SSIS, is a Microsoft SQL Server database component, um, which can be used to execute a wide range of data migration and integration tasks. It is very fast and quite reliable and flexible as well. And it supports bulk data move as well. It provides ETL, which is extraction, loading, and transformation of data. And it gives you several tools and several functions to kind of clean your data, aggregate it, transform it, merge it from a variety of sources, and then load it into your destination. It supports variety of sources and destinations, whether it's a flat file, whether it's some sort of different database, and similarly, different destinations. It can work with Visual Studio with several UI tools available. We will create a project in Visual Studio as well. It does provide additional control and processing operations as well. So it's not just a data transformation or ETL tool. It does give you some programming constructs as well if you need to create some sort of workflow type operations within your whole data migration project. All right, so in order to follow through all the steps in this video, you have to set up SSIS. Here is a link that can get you started. I will post this link in the description of the video as well. All right, so before we actually start doing it, we should have a Azure SQL database created in an Azure environment. So I suppose you have some sort of Azure subscription access. If you don't, you can always sign up using your MSDN credentials. That gives you $150 credit per month. So I do have a subscription here, and just like in all projects, I actually want to organize all of my Azure artifacts in an Azure resource group. So I'm going to create a resource group real quick on my MSDN subscription. I'm going to name it I will choose a region which will be most closest. North Central US, I think that's going to be closest to Midwest. And it's going to create it. So the resource group is created. Now I'm going to create an Azure SQL database. All right. So just create a database. For our purposes, we don't need a very heavy, gigantic database with lots of options. So we'll just create a single database. There are several other types which are all supported, but for our purposes, we'll just create a simple database with minimum cost. So I'm going to name it ssis.azure SQL-db, and this database needs to be hosted into some sort of server. So let's just create a server as well. I'm going to give it a same name. Some login. This is a SQL Server login. I always recommend to have a separate login. Give it a password. And similarly, we're going to select the North Central US. After that, it will give you, it will select some configuration, and it's giving you 2 cores, 32 GB machine where this database will be hosted. I'm not going to use Elastic Pool at the moment, but let's see if we could configure it and reduce the price. So I would go with the serverless option because that would give me more, optimization as well as control on the cost. And I think the maximum I should just give 10 GB should be enough for me. Minimum core 0.5, maximum core 1. So after doing this, I think that should be enough for now. Let's just see how much it's going to cost me. So it's going to cost like $1.50 per month plus some compute, depending on how much we are using it. So it is going to create it. It's going to take a while, maybe a minute or two. Meanwhile, I can show you what will be our steps. So first, we're going to load data into Azure SQL using some flat file. It's a flat file which will be used as a source, and then we will create a workflow in SSIS to load that data into Azure SQL. And for the purpose of simplicity, since our purpose is to see the tool and understand the process, we are not going to do any transformation in it, although we can, but that would be the topic of subsequent videos, upcoming videos. So the file that I'm going to use is going to be, let me just find it out and show that to you. Suppose we have a product database and all the products in a file, which is a very common scenario. In many enterprises, we have a separate system to hold, the products that the company sell. So I'm going to just open that up and we can quickly take a look. Give me 1 second. All right, so here is a simple flat file that contains some raw data, and there are almost, how many? 500, more than 500 products, and it contains some product ID, name, some other product number, um, and some other information. We're going to use this file in our first demo. All right, so our database is ready, as you can see here. Um, this is in Azure, and in order to connect to that database from my laptop, I have to add my information, or I should say my IP address, and enable or whitelist that IP into the system, so that into this machine, so that I could access it. So otherwise it won't allow me to access it. So it's telling me, okay, this is my client IP. I'm going to just add it. Say my laptop and save it. After we whitelist our IP, I can access this database from my local machine using SQL Server, Management Studio, or also the Visual Studio, where we actually have to access it in a while, in a bit. So, all right, so that's done. Now, let me open up the Visual Studio and let's start creating projects. So the link that I provided in the description, if you follow through that, it will help you to download and install the SQL Server Data Tools. So after you have SQL Server Data Tools installed and enabled, you could go in and create a SSIS project. So the name of the template is Integration Services Project. This is Visual Studio 2 2019. So I'm going to just select that. If you don't see it, since I have used it many times, that's why it was showing me as a recent project or template. You could always select or search for that into the previous screen here. You can search for that. So go ahead here and then create a project. Project. Okay, so once you create a project, it will create some files here on your right side in the Solution Explorer. Um, we will go into the details of each in upcoming videos. But today, what you need to know is that the data flow is something that we're interested in, and each project can have multiple control flows, and then one control flow can have multiple data flows. So this is kind of a way of organizing different artifacts. Um, so in control flow, you could always drag and drop a data flow task and then configure that data flow task however you want. So let's just add a data flow task, and then I'm going to name it products load. And then you can just double click it. It will actually take you to the more detailed view of the data flow, where you can add more controls from the left-hand toolbox and kind of create a workflow. So here, since I said, we're going to do a very simple thing, we just need a source and a destination. So in our case, in our first demo, we have a flat file as a data source. So let's just create that connection. We don't have any connection at the moment, so we will have to create one and specify what file do we need. So I'm going to name it product file connection. And we have to browse our file now. So that file, you could find whatever file you want to use. Desktop, and I'll have to select CSV files. All right, the file is here. Then you can go to columns. You see all the columns and some preview of the data. It figured that it's a comma delimited file. there are certain other options. You're going to leave everything as is and say OK. And then again, uh, if you want to look at it, ensure that if you want, you can actually disable some checkboxes and remove those columns from your data load. We'll just keep it as it is. And here our first, flat file source is created. Now, our destination should be, as we just talked about, a Azure SQL database. So I'm going to create from the destination category. You could drag and drop an ADO.NET destination. There are several other, but for all the data specific or data, server, I should say the SQL Server Azure specific destinations, we're going to use the ADO.NET destination. So let's create a column. Yes. Right now there is no connection, so we have to create a connection to our Azure SQL database. This is some connections available, but this is for local host. This is another database, AdventureWork database, which I have hosted on my local machine. We don't need that. We'll just create one for the cloud database. Okay. Here what we need is the full name of the database. So you could go back and actually, yeah, here you go. So server name, it's a fully qualified server name with the database, and then this database.windows.net, which is quite common in many Azure hosted services. So just copy that and then call it SQL Server Authentication. Put your user and password. I can even save the password. And you can see that it's asking for which database you want to use, right? So I'm going to use this SSIS Azure SQL DB, which we created. And that would create a connection with that database. After you select that connection into your connection manager, you should be able to select the table, right? Where you want this data to be imported. Now, the thing is, this is a very, clean, very empty database. There's nothing inside there. So in order to actually create um, a table, what you should do is first you just do OK, and then create a connection, and then double click, and then you'll see this new button is enabled. So when you click on it, you will see that based on the selected source, let me show you that. Based on the selected source, it actually generated a SQL script to create a table, and it grabbed all the information from the source connection. You can change the name. You can give it a more meaningful name. Let's say products, and that's it. So once you click OK, it will actually create that database. I'm seeing some errors here, some mapping issues probably. Okay. All right. So once you click this, I don't know if it's a bug or a feature, but you have to click on mappings to get these mappings generated. And since we did not have any, we are just following the simple steps. We are just following the default steps. We created the destination table using the same column names that we have in source. So it should generate the mappings automatically, which it just did. So I'm going to just click OK, and you can see that the error message goes away. One thing to note here is that on the bottom, on the connection managers, you will see that whatever connection you are creating, it's coming up here. It means that these connections are basically becoming part of your whole project, right? So regardless of how many data flow tasks you have and control flows and whatnot, you could use a connection or reuse a connection again and again. And every time you within that connection, you can change the database. Like in this case, we create a I'm sorry, the table. In this case, we created a separate table for products, right? So you can just run it like this from here. We have a start button. It will just execute it from within Dynamics. I'm sorry, within Visual Studio. And it runs successfully. It says 504 rows imported into the destination. Let's just test that. So let's just create a connection to your Azure SQL database. Or otherwise, you could, let me just do that. There are multiple ways to do that. You could also go into the query editor and run it in the Azure portal, which will be a little bit faster, but let's just do it here. If you don't have your static IP or public IP whitelisted, you will get an error every time when you try to access it. So since we whitelisted it, we should not get any error. And by the way, I think we did not specify the right name, so you're going to get some error. I think it's Azure SQL, right? Dash DB. All right. Okay, so this is our database, Azure database, and this is the list of all the tables that we have. You can see a product table is there. I can just quickly run a query to validate that we get all the data. All right, as you can see, the data has been loaded into Azure SQL from our on-prem flat file. Now, obviously, in the production environment, you will not run it through your laptop, right? You would like to automate it and kind of make it deployment ready so that it runs automatically. We will cover that in our upcoming videos. There will be a series of videos on SSIS in upcoming weeks on my channel. So yeah, so we just executed it. It's there. The data is there. Now let's move on to the next item. Next task that we want to do is basically to do the same thing, but this time our source will be different. We will create another data flow, and this time we will actually move data from on-prem installation, um, on-prem SQL Server to our Azure SQL Server, which is quite common scenario. So let's just drop a source. This time we're going to use ADO.NET source. As I said, we should use ADO whenever we have SQL Server or any database involved, database server involved. Right now we do not have a connection. So let's just create a connection. And by the way, I already have a localhost connection created, so I can use that connection. This localhost connection is my local SQL server installed on my machine. So just select that. It will give you a list of tables. I have a table named employees. So if I just want to show you what that table look like. Master, let's just venture work. Okay, maybe I'm not putting the right name. Let's just see. Okay, the schema name is different. It's human resource dot employee. Right. So here's a list of employees. We have almost 290 employees in this database with their job title and whatnot. So you're going to, it's again a raw data. I mean, for the purpose of demonstration, we're going to use it. So let's select that here. Employee. Okay, that's our source. Now, similarly, create a destination. We already have a SQL Server link created, Azure SQL link created. So I just selected that. As you can see, it's giving you available tables. We don't have any employee table, so we will just, go back, create a connection first. It works like a workflow. Again, new. So your types of mistakenly.NET provided that you may need to modify default columns. Okay. I think it complained about, some of the types that it could not gather or could not retrieve, but it's still giving us what is closest available, or what closest it can sense. So we'll give it a shot. Create a table with the name employee. Let's see the preview. Maybe basically the mapping, and the mappings are there. Okay, I think I say okay. It's created. Another way to execute a data flow task is you can just right click and go to the control flow. You can just right click. Is there any error? Stop responding for 16 seconds. I think there's some. Okay, right click and you can say execute task. All right, so it's executed. It did not give you the full view, but if you click on it, you can see that it's actually executed it and moved all the 290 employees there. So let's double check that. This is our on-prem SQL. So let's go back to our Azure SQL. Okay, just refresh it. Tables. We have employee, and then we have product. So this employee is different. So I'm gonna go back to the Azure SQL one and just do a query employee. All right, so we have all the employees loaded from on-prem SQL to Azure SQL. So I hope you liked the video. This is the end of it. Today's video, I just wanted to cover that. And in my upcoming videos, I will talk about more advanced options in SSIS. Thanks for watching. Bye.